Deborah Glass, Victorian Ombudsman, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Prue.
It's very nice to see you in the studio. I know you're doing a bit of a tour around regional Victoria at the moment. What's prompted that?
Well, I've just been in Bendigo this morning, and look, part of that is about making the point that I am the Victorian Ombudsman. I'm not the Ombudsman for Melbourne, and it's really important to get out and talk to people and meet people and get out to regional Victoria. I've been with Arc Justice, one of the community legal centres in Bendigo this morning. The community legal centres do fantastic work helping the most disadvantaged people in our society. And one of the things the Ombudsman can also do is help those people. So what I'm really keen to do is let the people who work in those places know how we can help their clients, the sorts of things that don't need to go to court, for example. Courts aren't the only answer to your legal problems.
Absolutely. Well, we are also talking, before we get to some of the serious stuff, we are also talking about memorable birthdays. And I am desperate to know whether you have a memorable birthday, Deborah Glass.
Well, I've had a few. I maybe won't share the negative ones with your listeners, but one particularly memorable birthday a few years ago was when I was presented, and this was a complete surprise, with a puppy.
Oh.
An 8-week-old Whippet puppy.
Was it a good surprise?
It was a fabulous surprise. It was an amazing surprise, but it was certainly memorable because I was completely unprepared for it.
Yeah, they often say that don't give pets as surprise gifts because you just never know what the response is going to be. But clearly it worked in your
It did. Well,
instance.
I had these dogs before, and I had to leave a Whippet behind when I left the UK some years before, so I was a bit mournful about that. So it was a wonderful surprise, actually.
And you still have the dog?
I still have the dog.
And what's its name?
Kenny.
Kenny the Whippet. We love it. Thank you. That is a memorable birthday. Nobody's really ever sprung me with a present like that before, and I'm just going to put it out there. Please don't. I don't want a dog. Thank you. Now, just remind us, because obviously we're putting you on the radio. People can ask any question that they'd like about how to complain about a public institution, or whether the question that they have does go to you, how long it takes, all of the ins and outs of dealing with the Victorian Ombudsman. And you can give us a call on 1300 303 468. You can text us as well, but it's often better to call so we can get a little bit more context around your question. But you obviously have been incredibly busy, Deborah Glass, you've released many reports recently, and one of them was a misconduct in public organisations casebook. So can you take us through what that one looked into?
Sure. I mean, there are lots of things my office does, and dealing with complaints from the public is a very, very big part of it. But we also deal with whistleblower cases, so misconduct allegations often that are referred to my office by IBAC, the Anti-Corruption Commission. So if it's not criminal, it doesn't meet their very high threshold for dealing with misconduct, they frequently send it to me. And most of these never see the light of day. You know, we investigate them, we provide private reports to agencies. Sometimes they're substantiated, sometimes they're not. But there are a lot of themes out of those investigations that are quite important for the public sector particularly to understand. So the reason we put out a casebook on misconduct, it really was to communicate those themes so the lessons can be learnt. And, you know, to take a really common example, conflicts of interest.
Yep.
Hiring your mates. Don't do it. Procurement, giving jobs to your family members, or giving jobs to a company you're associated with without
you have a
declaring
couple of case studies in
Absolutely.
here that outline that. Can you take us through a couple?
Well, the chairman of a cemetery trust, for example, who was involved in the same grave digging business that the trust gave business to, without declaring it. So it, on the face of it, it's completely unrelated, but in fact the person associated with the trust is giving business to their own company.
Putting money in their own pockets,
Yeah.
effectively.
Now, one of the things that we find time and time again with these is that people don't actually understand conflict. So this person might say, as indeed they did, but this was a good rate. Mm-hmm. This was, we were doing this cheaply, so nobody's suffered from that. Well, if you're doing it at a good rate, then they'll get the business anyway. That doesn't mean you shouldn't declare the conflict, because it really is, it's bad for public confidence, and it's just fundamentally wrong.
Mm-hmm. So remind us, though, what the jurisdiction is that you cover, because you're talking about public institutions, but there are so many, and you have oversight over a lot of different elements.
There are over 1,000 state and local government entities within my jurisdiction, but the ones that your listeners are more likely to have come across are all 79 local councils. We get a lot of complaints about local councils. All the state government departments, Department of Education, the Office of Housing, so public housing, mm-hmm. social housing, we get a lot of complaints about child protection, but also agencies like Transport Accident Commission, the State Revenue Office, Fines Victoria, all of those local government and state and local government entities are things you can complain to my office about.
And you have also obviously relationships. You mentioned IBAC before, but the local government inspectorate. How do you all work in together? How does that fit?
Well, good question. We talk to each other a lot. So sometimes it's not clear where a complaint will sit. Sometimes it's not clear on the margins whether it's a matter for my office or for IBAC. So and things will occasionally bounce between us. They will. There's quite a well-publicised recent example of that in Operation Daintree, which IBAC released a couple of months ago, which is the report into the Health Workers Union, a contract that involved quite a bit of ministerial interference, and it's that was an investigation that started with my office. So we began that investigation, and if something appears to involve corrupt conduct, then I have an obligation to refer that to IBAC, and they may well take it over. And that's what happened.
Okay, so at your level, you're looking into misconduct and other kinds of misdeeds. But when it comes to corruption, I guess that's a pretty strong line, isn't it?
Well, we have a definition of corrupt conduct in Victoria that essentially requires it to be a criminal offence. So IBAC deals with allegations of criminality. When it falls short of that, and it's something that the previous commissioner referred to as grey corruption, and I think that's quite a useful term. It's the kind of bad behaviour that falls short of criminal that people look at and go, that can't be right.
Yeah,
and they're right. It can't be right. It's but sometimes there is no comeback. There's nowhere to go. But so my office deals with those matters that are, say, breaches of codes of conduct.
Do you think, though, that needs to be looked at? Because we have seen that the criminal element, or the criminal conduct element, that has been thrown out in some circumstances, quite high profile circumstances to do with the state government, and they have then turned around and said nothing to see here, even when serious misconduct was involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'll let IBAC comment on its own jurisdiction, but I'm very much on record as saying that we need to have a much better way of dealing with misconduct by our politicians. And I say that because of my investigation of the Red Shirts matter some years ago, Operation Watts last year, into branch stacking. Because what people see is if that conduct falls short of the criminal, nothing happens. And even though we can determine in an investigation that somebody may have breached some standard, there is no outcome for that, and I think that's pretty bad for public confidence.
Absolutely. I mean, you are here to shed a light on some of the things that may happen, and I know that in your casebook you do say some of it is inadvertent, some of it is people just do not know necessarily where the lines are drawn. Once they know it, they can then follow the rules, but some of it is nefarious, and we need to have confidence in all of the organisations that are governing us.
Absolutely. And part of building that public confidence is to have a really strong whistleblower regime.
Yep.
So in terms of the role of my office, I deal with whistleblower matters that are sent to me by IBAC, and these cases in this book fall into that category. But I also deal with thousands upon thousands of complaints from the public about their local councils, about prisons, about public housing, about the state of the roads, you name it.
Yep.
We get a lot of them.
The Victorian Ombudsman is with me in the studio, Deborah Glass. You could give us a call if you have a question about whether you have a case to make, whether you have a complaint to make, how to make a complaint. All of those are perfectly viable. Ring us 1300 303 468. Deborah is fantastic and she will answer your question. You mentioned that you've been taking some complaints from regional people. What sorts of complaints are you hearing at the moment?
Well, local councils generally feature very strongly.
Yes.
But I have to say, not just in regional Victoria. They are the most common number of complaints we get actually are from prisons. But there is a reason for that, and there is a free call line to the Ombudsman's office at every Victorian prison.
Right.
And I think that if people who engage with their local council were similarly aware that they could come to the Ombudsman, we would
you'd be deluged.
We would be deluged. Yep. I'm sure of that, because it's not surprising, and this is not to be disparaging of local councils. Everybody has a relationship of some sort with their local council, and they have experiences, good and bad, and inevitably things go wrong and people have grievances. Mm-hmm. So it's important that people know where they can go if they do have a complaint.
What are the complaints you're hearing at the moment?
Well, let's see. Rates would be one.
Yep.
So financial hardship is a really big issue at the moment, understandably. People are doing it tough. COVID was very hard on a lot of people. And it's something I investigated a couple of years ago, was how well local councils deal with financial hardship. So I have done a whole report on this, and it's something I'm also monitoring.
And are they doing it better now because of the work that you've done?
They are doing better, but it is still patchy. So what I found when I did my report a couple of years ago was there was a huge variance in the way councils dealt with it. Some didn't even have policies on hardship.
Well, you're talking about COVID times, which were very difficult for so many people, and a lot of different policies were brought in across organisations and around hardship because so many people were doing it tough.
Yes, but one of the points we wanted to make was this wasn't just about COVID. This was, if you compare local councils with banks and utility companies, and I think this was a bit of a shock to the councils, they were much, much worse. So you've got these much more highly developed policies for dealing with financial hardship that in the banking community, in the banking sector, than in our local councils. That can't be right. And this isn't about, I think the really important point is it's not just COVID that has created financial hardship. This has been around for a long time. It certainly has made things worse for a lot of people. But a good agency and a good council will have a policy on how it deals with it, and it will have a policy that provides for a discretion to waive rates in exceptional circumstances.
I recall reading a part of that report, actually, Deborah Glass, and some of the case studies were just harrowing. We're talking about women who had been through domestic violence circumstances, who had been either thrown out of their homes or had left because they had no other choice, and they were still required to pay rates and interest on those rates, even though they had notified the council that they were under hardship requirements.
Indeed, I mean there were some horrible examples of people being hounded by debt collectors for payment of rates, which had then multiplied by a factor of tenfold because of penalty interest payments. So I did make a number of recommendations in there, include essentially to government rather than to individual local councils, and that included having that councils should have hardship policies. There should be a consistent guidance with how they deal with them. It was wrong, for example, to have a blanket policy of never waiving rates. That's one of the things we said very clearly in that report. I get it that you shouldn't do this often because councils need their rates income. It's vitally important to provide for services. But there will always be some really exceptional circumstance. The woman fleeing domestic violence who's been lumbered with a rates bill from a violent ex-partner.
Yep.
Or who's genuinely trying to get a life back together, where you've just got to be able to say, well, I think that it's more important to help this person ultimately keep their home and therefore be a good ratepayer in future than to try to punish them for the situation they're in now.
Do you get complaints about roads?
Oh yes, lots of complaints about roads, and certainly with the floods earlier this year, complaints about potholes, the general state of our roads. That's.
So what do you do with those? I mean, I'm not imagining that you're going to be out there with your high vis.
No, you are right. Well, let me give you a bit of advice on roads. It depends who owns the road. So if the major roads would be sort of Vic roads, Department of Transport responsibilities. Minor roads would generally be local councils. You can look this up, by the way. There is a website that will tell you who's responsible for what. But you can pretty broadly assume that if it's a major highway, that it's the responsibility of the Department of Transport.
I find that really interesting that people can come to you with complaints about roads. I guess they've probably been to the department, they've been to Vic Roads prior, and is that when they come to you, that they've had no joy?
What people really should do, ideally, is give the agency they're complaining about a chance to fix it. So if you've got a complaint about your local council, if your bin hasn't been collected for weeks, you've got something is really getting up your nose that they need to fix. Well, actually, the person who's best placed to fix that is council themselves. So our advice is generally, have you given them a chance to fix it? If you haven't, you should. Now, that's not an absolute fixed and necessary thing to do, because if somebody is obviously at the end of their tether and they really feel they've given them every chance and nothing's happening, then we can look into it, and we do. So we would expect somebody to, if you've got a problem with a pothole, have you taken it up with, what have they said? And then we will look and say, well, was that reasonable? So if that pothole has appeared overnight, is it reasonable to expect the Vic Roads to have known about that and to have rushed out and fixed it? Well, it probably isn't. But if it's been there for weeks and months and nothing has happened, then it may not be reasonable.
Deborah Glass is with us in the studio. She is the Victorian Ombudsman, and as you can hear, she deals with everything from potholes to almost corruption at a state government level. So you could give us a call if you'd like to ask her a question on 1300 303 468. You can tell her about your pothole, but she probably will ask you to tell the local council first. I am interested, though, in what happens once you receive a complaint and how that process moves forward, and whether you have any ability to force an outcome.
Look, we look at every complaint on its merits. And so let me give you a couple of sort of fairly common examples of things that we actually resolve quite quickly. Somebody has been trying to get a birth certificate out of the Registry of Births, Deaths and Marriages. They have reduced their hours of service. They're really hard to get hold of.
Yep.
They've paid their money. Nothing is happening. They ring us up to complain. We put in a call to the registry, and lo and behold, the person gets their birth certificate the next day.
Magical.
Now, that is a surprisingly common scenario. And you might think, wouldn't it be good if the person didn't have to complain to the Ombudsman to get their birth certificate? And you would be right to say that. But sometimes you just need the nudge of the Ombudsman's elbow to get them to do the right thing.
Brian is in Manangatang. G'day, Brian.
Yeah, g'day, how you going?
Yeah, good. What's your question?
I'm in Swan Hill Council area, and they put the dryland rates up by 20.8% this year, and we just want to know what we can do about it, because it's very unfair. I think they only put the town rates up by about 1.3%, but yeah, they've unfairly targeted the dryland growers. Yeah.
Brian, I'm really familiar with that that complaint, and it is a difficult one because actually the councils don't. It's the valuer general who values the land, not the councils. So if your property has been revalued, and that happens, I'm afraid, pretty often, and you're not the only one who's very unhappy about it, that's what the rates are based on. So it's there is a process for lodging and it should be on your rates notice. How can you object to a valuation? You can do that.
20% though does sound a lot. Yeah.
I've heard of others, and it can be more than that, but it does relate to a valuation, and there is a process for dealing with it. But that is one that you can talk to us about. But if they don't follow the process reasonably, you can certainly come and chat to one of my staff, and I will make sure we leave the number with the ABC.
Yeah.
But that's what you need to do first.
The big issue, we've gone to council to talk to them about it, and they still voted it through. But yeah, just the imposition of basically 21% on about 400 families, and the rest of the councils don't get a free kick of about 1.3%. So it's
tough.
a massive drag on all of us out here.
Hey, Brian, stay on the line. I'll get you to have a chat to my producer, if you will, and we'll get your number and we'll pass those details on to you as well about how you can take this forward. Very common, and as you say, the valuer general makes those valuations, but it isn't good when you get your rates notice and you think, how am I going to pay that?
Yeah, look, I'm sorry to say that people in that situation are in good company. There are many, many people right around the state who are doing it and doing it tough.
Can you complain about the valuer general?
Well, there is a process they follow, but all the more reason to have really good policies in place for dealing with hardship. So if you are lumbered with a bill that you're really struggling to pay, then to know that the council is going to be open to providing sort of reasonable allowances for people to be able to pay, to really to consider your situation. That's so important.
Absolutely. Deborah Gloss, we are out of time, and as always happens with these things, people start calling right at the end when we have to let you go. But would you come back and talk to us again?
I would love to come back. And what I would also like to do is to leave all of your listeners the number of the Ombudsman's office, because you can ring the Ombudsman directly on 1800 806 314. So my staff are answering the phones from, I think it's 9 to 5 these days. We try to run a pretty good service. You can also anytime go onto the website ombudsman.vic.gov.au. You can make a complaint online, and if you're not sure whether your complaint is something we can help you with, just ring up and ask, because we'll be able to point you in the right direction.
We'll just end with Katrina in Hamilton, who has a bit of information for us. Hello, Katrina.
Oh, look, thank you. I'll certainly be giving a call on other issues, but yeah, there is a way the elected councillors can actually have a rating policy, and our council will not collect more than 60% of the rates from the farming community, from agricultural land, and so you can have that in your rating policy. Everybody says it's about the valuation, it's about the distribution of the rates, and that can be adjusted. There can be differentials. I would suggest, they could look at the Southern Grampian Shire rating policy, and they could look at other councils that actually do have a similar technique. I think Ararat Rural City did something a few years ago with a group of like a jury, ratepayers jury. So, but everybody says it's the valuation. It's the distribution of the valuation, and it needs to be related to the services that are supplied and the quality of the services. So there are those two factors that you have the ability to sort of quarantine. So whatever our change in the farm value, we have capped our rates that will come from that area by a
good to hear,
percentage.
Katrina.
That's interesting. So there obviously are different mechanisms, aren't there, for different councils to put this in play. But yeah.
Well, I'm afraid what that illustrates is that 79 local councils generally do things 79 different ways, and I think that is one of the frustrations that many people feel.
Absolutely. We've had so much of your time, Deborah Glass, and thank you so much. Much appreciated coming
pleasure.
into the studio.